Across the restless waters, hundreds of ships swayed with the tide, their dark hulls glistening with salt, their prows carved into lions, serpents, and rams. They waited like a forest of sleeping beasts, sails furled and still, yet ready to unfurl and carry their masters into destiny. The air smelled of pine tar, salt, and smoke, and the sound of oars shifting in their locks mixed with the murmur of men and the whisper of the sea. On the cliffs above, fires burned on stone altars. Priests in white robes lifted their arms to the heavens, chanting hymns to Zeus the Thunderer, Poseidon the Earthshaker, and Artemis of the Hunt. Goats and bulls bled upon the stones, their cries swallowed by the waves. The blood spilled red into the foam, offered to purchase safe passage across the wide Aegean. At the heart of the harbour stood the flagship of Mycenae, towering above the rest, its prow carved into the head of a roaring lion. Upon its deck stood Agamemnon, High King of the Greeks. His cloak of crimson snapped in the morning wind, his bronze armour gleamed, and his face was set in the stern lines of command. He raised his arm, and silence rippled across the harbour. Warriors of Greece! His voice rang out, deep and thunderous, carrying over the waters. The time has come. The oaths we swore bind us as brothers. The theft of Helen will be answered. The insult to Menelaus will not go unpunished. Before us lies Troy, the prize that defied us, the city that mocked us. And before us lies glory, glory that no storm can drown, no time can erase. A roar answered him, rolling from ship to ship, shield to shield, until the very sea seemed to tremble with it. Spears rose into the air, striking against bronze. Men shouted, cursed, and wept all at once, driven by fury, by hope, by hunger for honor. Yet beneath the thunder of voices, not all hearts burned alike. Some men longed for plunder, some longed for vengeance, some only longed to return home, their courage masking a deeper fear. And Agamemnon, though he raised their spirits, knew in silence that he commanded not a single heart, but 1,000 wills, each bound by ambition, pride, and dread. Still, the Armada stirred. Still the gods watched. And as dawn broke across the sea, the greatest fleet the world had ever known readied itself to sail. Amid the forest of masts and sails, the greatest warriors of Greece stood apart. Each like a flame burning with its own fire, Menelaus, the red-haired king of Sparta, paced along the deck of his ship. His face was shadowed, his jaw clenched tight. Though he stood among thousands, he carried a loneliness deeper than the sea itself. For the woman stolen from him, Helen, his wife, was the reason this vast armada stirred. Her name haunted him like a ghost, her absence burning like salt upon a wound that would not heal. Every breath he drew was for her, every oath he swore soaked in rage. Beside him stood his brother Agamemnon, the commander of all. If Menelaus burned with grief, Agamemnon burned with something colder, ambition. His eyes lingered not only on Troy, but on the thought of a world where his command stretched beyond Mycenae, where his name would be spoken as Lord of Lords. Not far away moved Odysseus of Ithaca, lean, sharp-eyed, silent. He did not boast as others did, nor did he cry out for glory. His mind was a net cast wide, catching every whisper, every omen. Though once he had tried to avoid this war, now that he had come he would see it through with cunning no man could match. In his silence was more danger than in another's roar, and then came Ajax the Great, towering among men as a mountain among hills. His arms were thick as tree trunks, his shield so vast it could cover 3 warriors. He laughed loudly, boasting that the walls of Troy would crumble at the sight of him. His voice carried like thunder, and men drew courage from his presence, for he was as solid and immovable as stone itself. Yet greater still in presence was Achilles, son of Peleus, child of destiny. He stood at the prow of his black ship, hair of gold catching the first rays of the sun, his armor shining as though forged by the gods. Around him gathered his myrmidons, clad in dark armor, silent and disciplined. They watched their lord with devotion, for he was more than a man. He was a promise of death to his enemies and glory to his name. At his side stood Patroclus, his closest companion, steady where Achilles was wild, calm where he was fire. Patroclus spoke to him quietly, urging wisdom, caution, restraint. But Achilles only smiled, for within him burned a hunger that no words could quench. He did not sail for Helen, nor for Agamemnon, nor even for Greece. He sailed for something greater, immortality, the song that would outlive flesh. And so the kings and heroes of Greece stood gathered, each bound by oath, each driven by his own fire. Together they would sail, but their hearts beat to different drums, some for duty, some for vengeance, some for gold, and one for eternal glory. The signal came with the blast of a horn, deep and sonorous, echoing across the harbor like the roar of some ancient beast. At once, the Armada stirred. Oars dropped into the sea, striking the waves in perfect rhythm. Drums thundered aboard the flagships, their beats steady and commanding, driving the movement of 1,000 men as one. The sails, furled through the long night, unfurled at last, vast sheets of white and red that swelled with the morning wind. Each mast groaned, each rope tightened, and the fleet surged forward, cutting through the foam like blades of bronze. The harbor of Aulis shrank behind them, its cliffs fading into mist. On the shore, wives and mothers lifted their arms, crying out blessings, curses, and farewells. Children ran along the coast, their voices breaking against the endless sea. For some, it would be the last sight of their fathers, their husbands, their sons. Above it all, priests chanted from the rocks, their voices carried by the wind. Zeus guide them, Poseidon favor them. Ares walked beside their spears. The fleet became a living thing. Hundreds of ships, each driven by sweat, muscle, and hope, moved together like the wings of a giant bird spanning the horizon. The sea churned white in their wake. Shields gleamed on the decks. Helmets flashed beneath the sun. The Greeks, once scattered across many lands, many cities, now sailed as one. Yet even as they surged forward, the gods watched. Some with favor, some with anger, some with cold amusement. For this war was not only the will of men, but the game of Olympus. The men themselves felt it too. A hush would sometimes fall between the thunder of oars and drums, and in that silence, a shiver ran through the fleet. They knew. They were no longer merely sailing across the sea. They were sailing into legend. For 3 days and nights the sea was kind, carrying the Armada eastward beneath clear skies. The oars rose and fell in harmony, sails filled with strong winds, and men sang songs of home and victory. Hope traveled with them as steady as the tide. But on the 4th night the heavens changed. Dark clouds rolled down from the north, heavy and swollen. The moon vanished behind them, and the stars were swallowed whole. A silence fell upon the sea, a silence so deep it seemed the world itself held its breath. Then the first flash of lightning split the sky, white and jagged, striking the waves with fire. Thunder followed, rolling like the voice of Zeus himself. The storm came with fury. Wind screamed and tore at the sails, ripping them to shreds. Waves rose like mountains, hurling ships into valleys of black water. Oars snapped like twigs. Men clung to ropes and rails, crying out to gods they barely trusted. Some prayed, some cursed, some simply wept. Agamemnon's flagship pitched and groaned, its lion prow rising high, then plunging deep into the abyss of foam. Menelaus clutched the rail, salt spray stinging his eyes, his mind torn between fear of the sea and fury at the thought of Troy. Odysseus, standing firm at the stern of his vessel, shouted commands above the storm, his voice sharper than the wind. His eyes never left the horizon, cold and watchful. "The gods are testing us," he roared. "Hold fast, men. Grip the oars. Do not give the sea what it seeks." And amidst the chaos, upon the deck of his black ship, Achilles laughed. The waves drenched him, the lightning revealed his face, wild and exultant. He stood unshaken, as though the storm itself bowed before him. His myrmidons clung to the deck in silence, but their lord raised his arms to the sky. "See how even the sea cannot break us," he cried. "We are the sons of Greece. We bend the world to our will." To some his voice was madness. To others it was fire in the dark. But the gods above heard him, and their gaze lingered long. By dawn the storm had passed. The sea lay broken and foaming, littered with the wrecks of ships and the cries of men who would never see Troy. Yet the Armada endured, battered but unbroken. The survivors whispered as the sun rose. Some said the storm was Poseidon's wrath, for the sea was his domain. Others said it was Artemis, still angered by the blood of Iphigenia spilled at Aulis. Still others claimed Zeus himself had tested the resolve of the Greeks. But whatever the truth, the lesson was clear. The gods watched their voyage, and the gods were divided. 7 days from the harbor of Aulis, after storms and silence, after blood spilled upon the sea, The horizon began to change. At first, it was a faint smudge in the dawn light, a shadow rising where sky met water. Then, as the sun climbed higher, the coast of Asia Minor stretched before them, rolling hills crowned with forests, plains broad and golden, rivers glimmering like silver veins. But it was not the land that stole their breath. It was the city. There, rising from the plain like a crown of stone, stood Troy. Its walls gleamed in the morning sun, vast and unbroken, towers high and proud upon the battlements. The sight of them sent a hush across the Armada, as if even the oars forgot their rhythm. These were no ordinary walls. Legends said Poseidon himself had laid their stones. They shone like bronze, strong as mountains, untouched by time. From their tops, the banners of Troy fluttered defiantly in the wind. Within them lived Priam the king, Hector the lion-hearted, Paris the thief of Helen, and the countless warriors who would fight to the last to defend their home. The men of Greece stood upon their decks, their songs fading into silence. They gazed at Troy with awe, with fear, with hunger. Some whispered prayers. Some gripped their spears tighter. Others wondered if they had sailed not to victory, but into their own doom. On his flagship, Agamemnon raised his arm toward the shining city. His voice rang clear across the waters, carried by the wind. Behold the prize. Behold the city that defied us, that mocked us, that stole what was ours. Today begins the war that will echo for all time. Let Troy tremble. The Greek Armada has come. A roar erupted in answer, rolling across the fleet like thunder. Shields banged, spears rose, and voices cried out the names of gods and heroes alike. Yet high upon the walls of Troy, the watchmen saw them too. They sounded the horns, and the Trojans stirred within their gates. The drums of Greece had spoken, and the drums of Troy now answered. For the first time across the wide sea, the eyes of Greeks and Trojans met, one fleet, one city, bound together by fate. The horns of war blared across the sea, one by one. The Greek ships drove their bronze prows into the sand, their hulls grinding against the shore. Warriors leapt from the decks into the surf, water foaming around their greaves as they splashed forward, shields raised, spears gleaming in the morning light. The beach thundered with the clash of bronze as thousands of men stormed ashore. Sand flew beneath their sandals. Waves carried their battle cries, and the air filled with the shrill ring of war. But the Trojans were ready. From the great gates of the city and down across the plain they came, their own horns echoing, their shields locked in tight formation. Spears bristled above them like a forest of steel, and their voices rose as one. They would not let their beaches be claimed without blood. The first clash came swift and terrible. Bronze struck bronze, shields splintered, men fell screaming into the surf. The sea grew red with blood as the tide carried the dead back into the deep. Ajax the Great was the first to stand out among the Greeks, his enormous shield covering men to either side as he drove forward like a tower of flesh and iron. With each sweep of his spear, Trojan warriors fell broken and scattered. Beside him, Odysseus cut his way through the press of men, his mind cold and calculating even in the chaos of slaughter. He called commands, shifting the formations, finding weakness in the Trojan line. Where he pointed, the Greeks pressed, and where they pressed, the Trojans began to break. And then, with a cry that rose above the clash of thousands, Achilles came ashore. He was like a flame loosed upon the sand. His spear moved faster than the eye could follow, each thrust finding its mark. Around him the Myrmidons fought in silence, black armor gleaming, their discipline cutting through the confusion of war like a blade. Wherever Achilles turned, men fell, and his laughter rang wild and fierce. The Trojans faltered, but still they held. Their prince Hector was not yet upon the field, but even without him their will was unbroken. Wave after wave they met the Greeks at the edge of the sea, and wave after wave, men on both sides fell into the sand, staining it darker with each heartbeat. The landing became a slaughter, the slaughter a storm, and above it all the gods watched from Olympus. Some smiled, some wept, some whispered among themselves, for they knew this was only the beginning. By sunset the Greeks held the beach. Fires were lit across the sand, and tents began to rise, the first signs of a camp that would stand for years. The Trojans retreated behind their walls, but not in defeat, only in warning. For the war had begun, and it would not end quickly. And as the flames of the Greek camp crackled against the night, Achilles stood gazing toward the walls of Troy, his eyes shining with fire. To him this was no mere war. This was destiny. Night fell heavy upon the plain of Troy. The fires of the Greek camp burned in long, unbroken lines across the beach, their smoke drifting skyward like a signal to the gods. From afar, it seemed as though a second constellation had descended from the heavens to rest upon the earth. Thousands of flames, thousands of men, their voices carrying in song and in sorrow. The sea, dark now beneath the stars, lapped gently against the hulls of the ships. Some vessels bore scars from the landing, their sides cracked, their decks red with the memory of battle. Yet they stood, moored in tight formation, guardians of the army's only road home. Within the camp, the Greeks feasted on meat roasted over open fires, their laughter loud but uneasy. For even in triumph, the shadows of Troy's walls loomed over them. Those walls, high and unbroken, stood silent and watchful, their towers glinting beneath the moonlight like eyes that never closed. Agamemnon, seated beneath a great tent adorned with banners, spoke to his captains. His voice was proud, filled with the fire of command. Yet beneath it lingered a hunger that would not be sated until Troy was ash. Around him sat Menelaus, grim and restless, Odysseus, thoughtful and silent, Ajax, his mighty hands still blood-stained, and Achilles, whose gaze never left the horizon. Achilles' heart beat not with satisfaction, but with fury. He had tasted the blood of Trojans, yet it was not enough. His spirit burned for glory, for a deed so great that time itself could not forget. He whispered to himself, though none heard, "Let the years crumble, let the gods turn their faces, my name shall outlast them all." Beyond the walls in the city of Troy, the Trojans too gathered. King Priam stood upon his balcony, his aged eyes gazing toward the distant flames of the Greek camp. His sons surrounded him, Paris with his restless pride, Deiphobus with steel in his voice, and the noblest of all, Hector, calm and unshaken. Hector spoke with quiet strength. "Father, the Greeks are many, but Troy's heart is strong. Let them build their fires. Tomorrow and every tomorrow after, we shall meet them. Our walls are our shield, our courage our sword. This is our home, and no man shall take it from us." Priam's heart swelled with both pride and fear, for he knew the gods themselves had woven this war into fate. No wall, no spear, no mortal hand could break what was destined to unfold. Above all, Olympus stirred. The gods sat in their halls, their voices rising in debate. Hera and Athena urged on the Greeks, while Apollo and Aphrodite whispered their favor for Troy. Zeus, the father of gods and men, spoke little, his eyes fixed upon the battlefield that stretched between sea and city. He knew what the others did not, that many would fall, heroes and kings alike, before the end was written. And so, as the night deepened, both armies lay in uneasy slumber, their dreams heavy with omens. The Greeks dreamed of conquest, the Trojans of defense, but fate dreamed of neither. Fate dreamed only of fire, of ruin, of a tale that would echo forever in the songs of men. The Greek Armada had landed. The war of 1,000 ships had begun, and in the shadows of the night, destiny sharpened its blade.